Greetings, friends. I got a few people in. Nice to see you. Going to be continuing today with what I was working on, well, the past week and change, but it progresses a little bit every session. A few new viewers every session. So thanks for that, of course. Start with the usual pitch. From the Tomes, from Fox and Boar Games. If you're on Twitch now, hit that subscribe button if you have not already. And if you're watching this after the fact, feel free to go ahead and subscribe if you like what you're seeing. And follow on YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you might want to head over to Twitch, participate in our live chats while I work on this game and progress this game over the next several months. Hopefully finish it. Winter-ish is one of my goal. At least have the document done, then there's all the fun typesetting. Then from there we've got foxandboardgames.com, website where you can, platform off and find all the stuff like the social media and all the game updates. Which reminds me I should post another update up there this week. I should do at least a once a week update. Maybe I'll do that while I'm on live today. And thank you for subscribing and following and watching and chatting. It's the reason why I keep coming back and doing this. I'm really enjoying the process of sharing my work process, but also getting ideas from people. We had a nice discussion yesterday on some terminology in the game from Babacus, another viewer who has been working on a game himself or components to a game. Came up with some unusual a situation I had to deal with yesterday in terms of some terminology I was using in the game, possibly conflicting in a copyright sense with an existing system, which I was unaware of. So I was like, ooh, okay, I'll talk about that more in a minute. But I couldn't keep doing this, and I wouldn't keep doing this if people weren't interested. So thanks a lot. Having said all that, let's see where we're at as far as streaming some work today. Yep. So here we are. So I actually had to talk a little bit about gender this morning in this game. I'm not going to get into it now because this might be a discussion for an entirely different chat, which I know in some circles could become controversial, but it shouldn't be. First of all, the reality is it's a fantasy game, loosely based on some of our own ancient cultures. So any character gender should be able to do anything they would like, and gender should be up to the definition of the player. Because despite what we think, our modern concept of a binary gender is actually extremely new in context of the history of the world as we know it. Now, obviously, there are certain things certain genders can do, and others, biological sexes can do, and the other cannot. But this whole idea of gender identity was not always so clear-cut. And I've left it very much up to the players and up to the overseer of a game as to how they're going to handle that. But each culture does have gender fluidity involved in it, and most of our own ancient cultures did. And that's something that we just don't talk about today. Even as recently as the 1800s, I saw a series of postcards of people from the Old West, Calamity Jane being one of the most famous, who did not conform to a gender identity. And were not, by our modern lingo, they wouldn't have been considered straight people, and I think that's really interesting that we have this very specific idea, mostly through media and television and all these other things of these past maybe 100 years that we've been exposed to, that somehow it's now abnormal that people are claiming different genders as their own, and that's not the case at all. In many cultures, it was abnormal not to. There was a lot of class and caste and other considerations in here in the ancient world, but yeah, it's a big topic. But I thought I needed to include it because I got a little bit into the naming structures yesterday and the language structures, and I talked about how some of the name compositions occur throughout the various cultures, and they're all based in some real world language structure. In fact, I don't think I actually put that here. This wasn't available. This wasn't here in every single entry. So, I've actually been writing for about an hour already this morning. Had a lot of ideas overnight. A lot of things that I needed to kind of fill in. Got up early to see my bagpipe instructor in Glasgow at a big piping conference debut his amazing bagpipe chanter practice application, which it's not out for iOS yet. I use iOS, but we're talking about some possible workarounds for that. Kind of going through here and I was like, these later entries have a language entry under the characters. Now, obviously, it's kind of difficult to say, well, you'll have to have everything. Everything be authentic and convey things through your character in their native language, because obviously these native languages are made up. And it's a role-playing game. It's kind of what I say about gender, too. It's a fantasy game. Once we start becoming so rigid in terms of, oh, you have to have everything really look like it would in this fantasy world, then it's not a game, it's a simulation. In regards to gender, that's kind of my closing statement. You know, it's a fantasy game. If somebody wants to play a gender or a even gender neutral character who can do this, you know, or gender broad character, why on earth would a storyteller or overseer game master say, oh no, you can't do that? Though I have seen it in the past. There's no way your character who's a woman would actually be able to do that in this world. People are playing games to have fun. Oh, I do have a language section for the Hapshar. Okay. Wasn't sure. I guess the 4 were the only ones I left out. Well, it makes sense because Obviously, the Habsburg language, for example, is based on Germanic, continental Germanic, in that there's a really old form, which is now mostly used in a historical context or very formally. Then there's their formal form, what would be the Hochdeutsch. And then they have a more common form. More common modern form that most people speak and understand. Last night I finished writing up. So I wrote up the Varinka, who are kind of one of the more interesting. As I said yesterday, they're kind of like the Whateleys or some other pseudo-Lovecraftian society / family / cult, where they all come from a very small common stock and they all live in this city and they're all somewhat troubling and possibly disturbing to be around, but they're also very good sorcerers, and that's why people keep them around. Let's see. Keeping my own history straight is part of the challenge of this. I don't think I've ever actually shared this document. This could be of interest to anybody popping on here at some point. Okay. This is the actual historical document of the land. I mean, I haven't really shared this widely, even with playtesters. Shrink this down a little bit. There's probably a little better format anyway. And this is where you have all your atlas information. I guess the atlas would be the correct word. So this is a little bit about the daily, the cosmology, the daily flow of seasons. And this actually talks about all the land masses, the landmass and the broader areas of the starting area of the new kingdoms. And then I get a little bit into the cities here. There's some rough writing. This is why I don't show many people. So I read a sentence and thought, wow, I guess that was late at night. It's early in the day. We won't have any animal bombings like we did yesterday. It's not close to their feeding time. I think I actually need the history and culture document. The Altolian Empire. It looks like Italian Empire when you read it quickly, but it's not. That's timeline's way off. Of course, I wrote this as the cursory timeline, perhaps 3 to 4 years ago. So, well, 2 to 3 years ago. So, oh yeah, I've changed a lot of that. I guess I shouldn't go down that rabbit hole today. About that tracks. Let's see. So what happens when you go look at another document for just a tiny bit of information? So I said this in the previous streams, but in case you end up just catching one or the other later, this week will be the last week I'll stream, probably for about a week. We plan to travel, if there's not any travel catastrophe. So I'll have a week off of streaming, unless I do a pop-up stream from Norway for a few minutes, but it's not going to be something like this. It would probably just be if I somehow have this facility to say hi from somewhere else. But I'm not planning that in. Actually working in another document, of course. Neil, who was in yesterday, so I'm going to jump in today, but he's working at his day job, which is a public school. He said, believe it or not, a public school blocks Twitch. I actually don't know if my college campus does. Haven't tried it. I guess we'll find out. I'll have a class login while I'm. Names that language after that. So I have these characters called the Bloodless that don't conform to any major culture, mixed heritage. And I always wonder, is that going to be the half elf, right? People who don't necessarily want to play an elf, but kind of don't want to play a human, but want some kind of benefit. Again, these people are all human. And I didn't give any real distinct disadvantages to being bloodless. There's a slight advantage and a little bit more freedom of spending of points. Revisit the social system. Social challenges, I think I called it. There's Blake. Yep. That's exactly what happens. They are the result of vampiric attacks. So tomorrow night's Tavern Chat, which will be the last one probably for 2 weeks, maybe a week, depending how things go, is in fact about culture and games, which makes sense with what I'm working on right as I type now. And that is going to be focused not on, we had a previous chat on character races, fantasy races. What's the role of fantasy races? Where do they come from? Where this is going to be a discussion on how to make unique cultures out of those races or races in general in fantasy games or characters in general in fantasy games. And, it's kind of something that I've railed against a little bit with a lot of the more popular games. Historically, not even just recently, that the race, even in movies and TV, early Star Trek and some of Star Wars, where there's no real culture there. It's just a thing in a rubber suit with a creature with rubber ears. It's an elf because it has pointy ears, but it doesn't. There's no definition as to what makes an elf culture unique. I understand this is a deep, complex, possibly deep, complex thing that it's also something a lot of game that may be irrelevant in certain games, but I think having touches of it in cultural development helps make a world seem more alive. And it's not something everyone's interested in doing either, and that's absolutely fine. I find myself varying the invite list for these two just to see, just to kind of spread the word out a little bit. And occasionally someone will surprise me when they appear. I didn't know they were that into gaming, or I didn't think they were that interested in what was going on here. Like a huge chunk of my normal viewership is away someplace these next couple weeks, and I guess I will be too. Some of the people I know who I talk to regularly about this stuff are at Pensig or at one of the music festivals abroad. Oh yeah, I guess I won't invite them. They're in Norway or in Germany or wherever. So the other thing I'm doing is concept examples. As we're developing, and this is common in games, as I'm going through the character development section, I have a little example of someone making a character. I'm actually using Arda, the gladiator, Diana's character, who was played in the last playtest, because it was made with the most modern version of the rules. All right, gonna take a little break. I'll be back in a few minutes. right. Hello to the few new viewers who have popped on. Again, feel free to say hi. Don't feel obligated to say hi. So here we have character concept example of a gladiator who was thrown into or sold into slavery after her house was on the losing side of a noble house conflict, as was not uncommon in much of our own history. She was tossed into the gladiatorial arena and meant to be the victim or sacrifice of, I leave it open, of another gladiator or a wild beast. But instead she won the fight, or at least survived the fight due to exhibiting speed and strength, and she was pulled out and began training. In the gladiator circuit. And at the time of the start of the game, she had purchased her freedom by winning in the pits, making a career out of winning in the pits. That's kind of the origin story of this character. That's the ongoing example. I always found the walk along with the creators in creating a character one of the more amusing and fun parts of reading a game book. Like Harvey Dent from Call of Cthulhu, who still is used. In the most recent versions of the game, following investigator Harvey Dent on his little adventures through the game book. I think everybody who writes a game is in a way trying to recreate what they enjoyed about the original game experiences. Stephen King said it very well, that in essence, most writers who fall into any kind of genre writing, at least, never wanted the first adventure they went on in a book to end. So in a way, they're always trying to recapture that. And I think that's a very valid observation. I'm trying to and I think it could be said for any art. You're trying to make people feel the way you felt when you experienced something, or think about something, the way that you thought about something. Yeah, there's Babacus. Greetings. How's your work coming? Continuing on from yesterday, where we left off yesterday. So, after our discussion on the name of a trait to supplement fate, I actually decided on Glory. I went through a couple different iterations. I researched some naming and word usage overnight, and I think Glory is where it's going to rest, because this is also a sword and sorcery game where characters are meant to be kind of larger than life. So I think instead of fate points, there are glory points. Also avoids any conflict with fate, TM, RPG. Because the more I thought about it overnight, I thought, yeah, could be a thing. Could be a thing that causes me a problem later. I mean, maybe not. Fate's a pretty generic term. A lot of games use it, but I was like, this is kind of close to their system. I think I'll... Or should I say there's some relationship to their system? I don't know if it's close to it. I think you had just briefly talked about standing, like kind of like you had just touched on the term. I think that's I think that's where we last left off. That's an interesting concept. I mean, to me, I think I mentioned this yesterday as well. It's reminiscent of a lot of board game concepts in terms of having that meta resource, and which I think it's fine. I mean, I think it's fine to have this sort of thing that exists that players have to contest with. Well, as far as events, Facebook just keeps nerfing the number of invites you can send. Like this, again, the platform is becoming less and less feasible for anything besides, arguing with your friends over politics or whatever. Like every time they say it's this new business platform and you should invest in it, and you go to try to do something in it, unfortunately, a lot of the people I know are on there. Yeah, it's interesting. So that seems like a pretty good resolution to some of what you were struggling with yesterday, in terms of how to actually put this stuff in the game world and have it work. It's interesting. That'll definitely give a different spin on how how those sorts of things actually affect the game. You know, cause, we were joking yesterday, in a lot of these old school games, and among some gamers still today, I was talking to a friend yesterday. You know, this whole idea of, well, political and social interaction, we don't need to resolve things through that. You know, we'll just attack them. But if you build it into your game that there's some sort of structure and reward system, and I know Fate might already have that in there. Like I said, I'm not that familiar with that game. I think I played a short play using that system a number of years ago. Yeah, so it's going to be one of those overall, kind of world rooted traits. You know, it's not something that a player can just buy more of later with experience or advancement or whatever. That's how I function. How Fate, or well, Glory, now called Glory, Fate, would function similarly in this game. That it's something you can't just buy more of later. It has to be awarded or earned as part of a task completion. I just actually had this up earlier. I'll jump over to it now since we're talking about it. Let's see. This is the beta rule set for the game. And let's see. So there's a reputation system based on glory, and this basically shifts. Glory will basically shift the relationship status plus or minus one, depending on the initial contact of the player character to any NPC met, and that's based on, and the whole game is based on these challenge ratings and variations of these challenge ratings. So If your first contact, if your first contact with somebody would be a neutral contact, it's a difficult challenge rating. And to affect social challenges, it's a base presence challenge. I mean, you don't really add any scores to it, any skills to it. It's a challenge rating of 7. And whoever gets the most successes, it's a post challenge, and whoever gets the most successes can shift it one way or the other. And for example, you can actually have 2 different challenge ratings depending on who's doing the rolling. For a soldier looking out for intruders, or a friend betrayed in the past, a bounty hunter charged with finding a hero starts off with an unfriendly or non-compliant challenge rating to affect. So that starts off as unlikely. You're probably not going to change their mind very easily just by rolling dice. And of course, this can be modified by the amount of role playing a person does or the circumstances. And then your glory can influence this positively or negatively. If you're a high glory character, but you're known for, leveling villages and taking slaves, most people who meet you, which is probably going to start off as unfriendly to hostile. And even if they start off as neutral, if they know who you are, if they know your name, or if they can recognize you, a high glory might start bumping this up. That they're going to be extremely hostile when they first confront you. Whereas if you're known as a folk hero or a benevolent ruler or a great warrior who protects people, then that can shift it down upon first meeting. And this is different from social skill checks. I mean, there's social skill checks like lying, manipulation, things like that that'll give a different set of parameters to roll against. But this is just to determine what the initial base contact challenge rating is. I'm looking at this, I might actually have to modify this. Actually, this base, I think I determined this base presence was not applicable. So yeah, unfortunately, I had the base presence rating that. Well, maybe I should leave that in. Because I think there are a few abilities that call for a base presence where you don't modify it with a skill. Only a presence roll. Yeah, that's why I left that. Okay. It's good if I reread my rules, right? I have a lot of the rules in place, but boy, this still needs some organization, which is what I'm doing now. All right. As always, back to the other document. Just for example, and this is always very interesting to me. You know, part of why I get into the sort of game that I'm writing and get into these other games that I have talked about. So you can pull up Google as a work share. So I'm talking about the name Arda. You know, it was originally listed as a Turkish or an Armenian name. It's kind of most commonly known as a Turkish or Armenian name. You know, please don't go to the names for your baby or names for your pet sites, because those are usually not particularly accurate. But if you look to some actual name and genealogy sites, you'll find that Arda is a very old name that appears to be sourced in root languages that influenced both the British Isles in Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, and it comes from a Proto-Indic, and that's kind of cool that it appears in both places like Turkey and then other parts in North Africa coming down from the Turkish influence, the Mediterranean influence, and Balkan influence. But then it also appears in England or Anglo-Saxon England and in territories such as Scandinavia. So it's kind of a cool. I know that when she was researching the name, she found it was kind of interesting. Because the way I described the Hapshar names is that the proper Hapshar names are closer to something like Roman era Anglo-sourced languages. So they can be Celtic, Germanic influenced, but then they also had a pretty extensive empire, much like the Romans at one time. So there are all these other naming conventions that started coming in. So it's kind of cool when someone embraces that. Greetings, a few people popped in recently and tuned in. Still working on the character creation portions for Tales of the Harrowed Land. Working on some character concept development. Finally done with the basis of the cultural section that I've been working on and really worked on intensively yesterday for a while. Did I not finish the Varinka gifts last night? I guess I did it in my head. I didn't actually write it up. So my conflict with the Varinka gifts, and as I've said, they're the kind of evil sorcerer kingdom. If we wanna break it down to fantasy tropes, the evil sorcerer city, but they're closer to a kind of H.P. Lovecraft, eldritch darkness, dread that lurks somewhere within the city that they tarry with or worship. And I was trying to find, each I pared it down to 4 gifts. If you were on here yesterday, you know that I was in a debate because it was like the gifts can end up defining the culture too much. it could end up that, oh, you take the culture, you get a bonus on these gifts, so you end up taking those gifts. And I understand that's kind of natural. And I thought, well, I was trying to compensate by adding more and a wider variety of gifts across the cultures. And then I realized that's probably the wrong way to do it. What I actually did is then I reduced the number of gifts that each culture has any kind of bonus to purchase. And I think that will let people say, well, all right, I have this idea and for a character, oh, and I'll get a bonus on these gifts if I take this culture. But it won't necessarily say, like, have every person who wants to be this particular culture or this particular type of character play a certain culture. And I know this was part of the move in 5th edition too, to minimize what the impact of racial characteristics for characters, which in some cases it works, in some cases it doesn't. And the halfling racial bonus is just ridiculous. I'll just ignore ones. Now I'll just ignore that one too. No, I don't critically fail ever, and I'm kind of like, there's different ways to simulate luck, I get it. They want to simulate, Frodo survive or Bilbo surviving the attack of the trolls, or being captured by the trolls, or these things that we kind of think of when we think of halflings and hobbits and whatever. But I got some more from, yeah. Again, my chat doesn't refresh automatically sometimes. All right, so standing could become a communal pool too. That's pretty cool. But that's the end result. I mean, I've heard that from a lot of game designers, and we had a really interesting discussion about this yesterday. I mentioned that I was interviewing somebody to teach some game design classes while I'm out of school, while I'm on sabbatical, and he said he noticed this among students too, that a lot of times they'll never get that final prototype done because then they feel they have to commit to the idea. But that's the only way you ever know if it works, and it's never final. I mean, I've been playtesting this system for probably over 2 years now, and every time we play tested it, something new came up and we could change it. And I think that's what I've had to really get through to some of my students too. Like, don't be afraid to put it out there, even if you know you're gonna have to change it or you feel like it's finalizing it. It's really just this ongoing process. I mean, even established games that have been out for 30 years, they'll come out with an errata at some point. Oh yeah, by the way, we noticed this. I'm looking forward to playtesting all this new stuff. I just have to get a scenario or two together, which is actually what I plan to do. I'm not going to have a lot of writing time while I'm traveling, I don't think, but anytime I do have, instead of trying to work on rules, I think I'm just going to start taking notes for scenarios to get some playtest stuff going. It's kind of weird that I'm like, the only thing these guys are really good at is sorcery and knowing stuff. I mean, they have. I could really swear that I had written up their gifts last night. Just double check. It was pretty late. And like you said, I'm sure once we see characters made with these rules, we're gonna have some revisions going in. So I'm not getting too attached to any of it. Yeah, Blake, I just saw your text. Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely is going to happen. Let's see. That's the goal, right? Yes, they definitely don't get nature affinity. Why are there no animals in this city? Why do wild animals shun the vicinity of this city? Weather sense could be interesting, but again, I have these 1 point cost ones. I don't really get domain naturally. Item of power. Yes. They're more likely to have an item of power. If you want to play your occultist and min-max, this would definitely be the culture to do it. In fact, they might only get 3 because they also get a bonus on buy. They're the only culture that gains a bonus on buying magic to start. And that would be sorcery. And it is, in fact, as potentially unpleasant to have it as you would think. Corruptive sense should actually be a supernatural gift. Let's move that down there right now. Which of course means moving it in every other document. Let's see. What was that one? That one. Spiritual gifts. Let's see. Change it in this document now too. Oh look, the Nightbot appears. Actually, others Curzon. Corruption, of course. How's it going, Curzon? Glad you can make it. So that's interesting, Bob, because so that reminds me a lot of things like the paths of the path of humanity and the paths of enlightenment, and something like Vampire, where like everything you do is kind of governed by this ideal, and how you interact with it actually affects your character and its standing within its sect or society or whatever. So I think that's kind of an interesting idea. Maybe I would suggest making it broader than just political idea though. Like that would be my thought. Like have it be more about. Yeah, well, no, I guess political. 'Cause everything's political. I mean, this is a discussion I have with people all the time. Oh, my idea is not political. Well, everything's political. Not in the sense of choosing a party or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. But in terms of how it affects the greater society. Yeah, that's the joke. Yeah, of course the Varenka are better at saying to Curzon are better at sorcery. They're the only ones who are, because that automatically also gives another point of corruption. So that of course is the design that they are in fact themselves. The culture is because of their history, and they're layering in this stronghold or this place infected by something else is has it affected their entire world. All right. Wow, almost a time. Look at that. 2 hours goes quickly when you are working on stuff. Like I said, I've actually been up pretty early this morning and was writing by about 9 o'clock. And I didn't stream it actually because I was also watching a stream, an international stream, music based that my music instructor was hosting. But I thought about flipping on my stream a little early, but I just then by the time it all came around, I was like, well, I don't think maybe the Ribari should have access to a supernatural gift too. Because of their long history. Their really long history in the land and being basically the oldest culture with this huge scriptorium and all this. No one's taken regeneration yet. It costs as much as magic to know to start, or to have. You can only buy it to start. But it's a game changer, literally. I mean, you regenerate like a troll in D&D. You know, it's like... I think you met somebody that had it in the playtest. Tom and Blake, who were on today. I think you met the two riders that attacked the caravan. One of them had regeneration. Because clearly they were also not normal. They were not normal humans. They were something else. Excuse me. I wonder if maybe the Ribari get item of power is possible too. Given their long history of archiving. Excuse me. I guess an item of power could also represent some sort of knowledge as well. Yeah, that's a good point. So it's a good point if you're talking about players or NPCs, because that's actually that really would change things in terms of how that works in your game. And yeah, Curzon, like regeneration, part of it's expensive because it's not something every character should take as a filler, right? I mean, yeah, there has to be a reason. I actually even say there should be some reason, like you are descended from something else. And I haven't gotten into that with this game. There are not necessarily demi-human races to play, but there was originally a component in there that you are descended from mythical things and other creatures, where you have some of it in your veins. And regeneration was kind of the only holdover from that initial concept because, again, it got so complicated. Yeah, so standing is tied to real objects and can be manipulated. That's really interesting. But then you have to determine, is standing an ideal? Is standing an idea? Is standing a tangible force in the world? I mean, that's kind of how I had to quantify corruption. Or when Curzon, Tom, and I were working on the Blight Realms game, like, what is the Blight? Like, what is the magic in the? What is the void in the game? Is it something tangible? Is it an idea? Is it an academic thing? Yeah, generic elder blood, exactly. There's something else in your veins. That's whether it's dragon blood or giant blood or whatever. I mean, that's ubiquitous. Everything from D&D to Game of Thrones to Beowulf, to several Norse myths. They were mythical because they were descended from giants or descended from one of the gods or both. So it's gods or goddesses, and so it's that's not a new or fresh idea. But in this game, I think you can definitely play a point, but it's so human centric. I don't even want to start introducing some of these more fantastic concepts, at least not right up front. I mean, there are fantastic creatures in the game. I just haven't made it the focal point. And there's a narrative reason for it too in the world history. I think maybe the Vrinkable have enhanced. Actually, have the enhanced presence. 'Cause if you have enhanced presence, doesn't mean it's because you're attractive or that you're appealing. It could be you just have a dominating presence. Caps off is good, right? Want to take the caps off. So there was okay. Well, actually, the next play test, I'm going to steer away from magic use, except for witchcraft, because we haven't seen witchcraft in play at all, and it needs a run through. I'm going to be discouraging magic use because I need to see some of the. It's going to be more city and social based, which that actually works for sorcery too. Because remember, Blake's character has subjugation, which is mental control. But I'm going to actually discourage it for a couple of reasons. One, I've made magic even more expensive and harder to use. It's more expensive to buy, but it's now harder to use, and it really does dominate the character makeup. And I want to see a wider variety of characters played. We have a whole new 40 pages of gifts: mental, social, physical, two types of physical: speed and endurance, or toughness, whatever you want to call it, strength, toughness, for each one for the four attributes. And we have over 24 individual abilities from the various combat styles. So there's still more to do with magic because it's so broad and it's so big and it's so varied, but at the same time there's just a lot of new stuff to look at too. So I'm actually going to kind of discourage too much magic in the next playtest. Now it depends who all manages to play too. I'm assuming it'll be the core four who are playing D&D. Bills has just said he's going to step out of new games, at least for the time being, due to his schedule, which is cool. I mean, again, I prefer, you know. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to leave it open. That's what so I think I mentioned before, that's what I'm going to be getting together while I'm away, is kind of the framework. Because I'm going to try it with the in-person group too, who's still kind of present in the in-person group and who would like to play it. I know Fran and Lauren, I think, are pretty much waiting for D&D to start back up. I mean, I think they're going to be getting into it more once D&D starts back up. I think they'd like to play test this. I just want to really nail down with people, like, make it set firm playtest times and a firm playtest schedule, and really, really kind of make it a very structured, more structured thing than our games have been. So I got to really talk to everybody and see where they're at with that. But with our regular group, if we call our regular group on Thursday nights, I mean, obviously Blake's running D&D now, so I want to play that for a while. But in the meantime, I'm going to start getting the materials for the next play test, which will be a limited story. It won't be this big, long, flowing campaign, but it'll be probably 16 hours of play is about what I'm going to try to gauge it at. It'll be a fixed story from beginning to end with some advancement, because I think the advancement works pretty well. I don't think I need to really test the advancement again. But yeah, we haven't even seen Witchcraft played. Like, it's still all abstract. It's still going back to what Babak said about, putting stuff out there and play testing. I'm like, there's one entire magic subset that we haven't even seen played. Well, there's also the dabbler option. No one's done that yet, where your character just has a little bit of magic, so it doesn't dominate the character. But like, you could be a witch with a path or two, and it doesn't. You can never raise it as high as some of the other, or expand it as much as in terms of the number of paths within the discipline that you can have. But let's just say you want a witch who sees the future, who's a diviner, or is a healer, and that's all you want that character to do. Then for 2 points, you can take Dabbler, and that just allows you to play around with magic. You're never going to be as powerful as, Blake Sorcerer or your Primevalist, who literally could, reshape the entire environment with their magic. Yes, exactly. And I think Dabbler will work specifically well with Witchcraft. And again, there's so much new in terms of other gifts that I've introduced, but I took a few things out too, a few things that were redundant or just weren't clear or didn't make sense or would take this ridiculous amount of time to get functioning for the basic game. I was like, you know what? We don't need shapeshifting yet. We don't need that. Could be part of primeval magic if we really want to put it in at some point. The blessings. There was a system in for that where you, like I've mentioned in a couple streams, you were basically like either blessed by or almost an avatar of one of the gods, goddesses of the land. But before I put that in, I have to really finish the world building in that regard. Okay, so they have that. All right, take a quick break. I'm gonna go a little bit longer today, I think. So I'm in the middle of writing. Take a little quick break, and then I'll be back. Decided to adjust the point of view a little bit. Yeah, that works. Stand for a little bit due to back. I like the view on the other one better. I am back. Let's see. The other one's my cam on the MacBook, so that is a really high quality camera. This one, not quite as much. Since I'm going to be stuck standing for a little bit. Definitely prefer the aspect ratio and quality of the other one. Do some cropping. Something I wanted to do. We'll play around with that later. So Blake had another suggestion in terms of the chat delay. Check that out. Yeah, it has to. I've been struggling with it in terms of getting it set up and functioning. Exactly how I want it. One more second. Exactly how I want it to work. So, he suggested. Blake suggested too. So I'm using UBS Studio, and I am in fact working with pop-up windows with sometimes the chat in the background, and I'm not sure why. Let's see, pause chat, scroll only. Let's see. No, doesn't seem to do anything. Might be a setting I have to go to the actual Twitch site to adjust. I'll play around with that. But yeah, it's odd. I'll play around with that in the camera settings. It's quite odd. I haven't really seen it do that with other streams either. And I know other people are doing other things and the stream's continuing, so I'll have to really just check my settings. Move back down to this view. Like I said, I'll play around with that alternate stuff at some other point. So I need one more gift for them. This balancing act is for a, tabletop RPG, which is non-competitive. The balancing act that occurs in skirmish-based MMOs, for example, I can't even imagine. That's why stuff's changing all the time. People keep getting upset, but I'm like, this is just a very slight example of how adjusting one thing just affects everything else in the game. I'll give them domain. And to check what Blake told me to look at. Go over to my Twitch channel, take a look at it over here. I'm wondering if OBS is overriding it with some kind of pausing. Chat settings, chat. There's one time that I thought I had corrected it by setting something, and then it reverted. And I find that extremely frustrating. Seeing the chat within the chat. How fascinating. Edit stream info. Clip that. Manage. Create a channel. Do that. Alright, well, anyway. You aren't here to see me fumble through settings. Yeah, well, so that... Your system would really work if you're talking about things like having different guilds and factions. That's how I see it working more than necessarily it being some ideal that governs the character in its entirety. I think that would get really, really clumsy. In my opinion. Mind you, like I said, I'm wrestling with a lot of those same concepts myself in terms of agency in a game and dictate the characters having an attribute that somehow dictates the character's existence in the world, integration into the world environment, in addition to just being a player character that solves adventures or, kills monsters or whatever. It's tough. That's why a lot of these games have neglected the social aspect for so long, because there's no real good and easy way to change it. Yeah, I don't know, Blake. I'm looking for that setting that you mentioned. I don't see it here. I will take a look at it later. I assumed it was something that I could set very quickly to have the chat set as live instead of top. But clearly, it's not meant to be that easy. Well, I think what I always say to people when I talk about game dev and these sorts of subsystems within a game is, does it facilitate the story you're trying to tell within a particular game or within a particular environment? And that's up to you. That's totally up to you in terms of being the developer of the game. There shouldn't be anybody who tells you that it'll work or won't work until you play test it and see if it works or it doesn't work. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, this brainstorming is the way to do it. When I undertake any project, I have sometimes pages and pages of just notes, and then I'll throw out there and I'll try it, and sometimes they all make it in, sometimes none of them make it in. think I got a balance of the gifts. I wrote up some culture notes. Or some concept notes, rather. Well, let's see. Find the history of that name. Well, tiers make it quite manageable, I think. Having a tiered system like that, really, I think, just kind of like, it's like, okay, now I can manage it. Now I can determine how it'll affect things incrementally. Let's have building example. Well, it could either be a sabotage mechanism or it could be just an overpowering mechanism. Maybe your standing gets so high that you just overwhelm the other faction. That could be a way of handling it too. My one suggestion, though, and I don't know how much you've done as far as working on systems, is to get even your most basic concept of it and put it out there and let people play it. And that's always the toughest part because you're always like, well, but it's not ready. So it's never ready, until you get it out there and start throwing it. I mean, Blake and Neil and Tom and I, for the beginning of this game, there were nights we just went on Roll20 and I just set up like a gladiator arena. And I just basically handed them the most bare bone character concepts. So here, fight it out. All right, fight them out. Fight it out again. Okay, change these stats. Fight it out again. And it was after doing that for several weeks that we finally kind of got a balance as far as challenge ratings and die pools and all that kind of stuff. So, in review, today went through. I think I got the first two major sections of character creation completed. Picking culture, trying to balance the culture elements against each other and internally. Obviously, it's still in a draft form. It's all gonna be final edits and rewrites are still months away. Worked on the concept building examples, the walkthrough of building a character. Some different effects on the game. Now here's just as an example, Bob, because like I have persona. So persona is basically background prompts, character building prompts, right? Like what's the hero's prize possession, etc. But I actually went in and gave them tangible game effects. Because that's the kind of thing. Even I, who I'm really into developing characters and developing environments, half the time when I'm making a character to play a game, I'm like, oh, I'll fill that in later, right? And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. And I've had players who never do that, and we had a whole discussion on our Wednesday night chats about backstory. How valuable is it? Are prompts like this more valuable? Is just making it up as you go the most valuable way to do it? Because the most interesting thing that can happen to a character is what's going on in the game, right? Nobody cares about the backstory. That was the joke. My heading for that chat was very snarky. Nobody cares about your character backstory. That's not true. We all know it's not true. We all know that backstories and whatnot can be extremely important. The more I look at it, the more I hate this resource stuff. Yeah, well, it's always a balance, right? I feel that way about parts of this game too. I go back and I reread it and I say, why did I even do that? Like, why did I even put that in? That's stupid. Get rid of that. It's a difficult balancing act dealing with social aspects of a game or non-tangible aspects of a game or non-quantitative aspects of a game, and then making it tangible, trying to make it tangible. I mean, this is why in board games you have things like prestige points or whatever, or things that represent tangible and non-tangible resources you can balance. But it's really hard to do in an RPG. And because then it, as you said yesterday, then at what point does it just become a meta thing, right? Like of people manipulating the resources just because they can. Neil, who was on yesterday, was like, but isn't that kind of what all games are about, really? It's, you know, we played a card game, The Festival, H.P. Lovecraft, The Festival. It's an Italian card game based on the story The Festival, which the backstory of it doesn't matter. But, I mean, it was weird because, like, you had to literally read and game the cards to win the game. So it was more about the management and wording and the resources on the card and learning how to game those resources than it was about playing a card game about H.P. Lovecraft's The Festival. It was this weird kind of thing, or it was like it's a cool game. I had fun with it. We had a lot of fun with it a couple of weeks ago. But I'm like, yeah, but the weird thing is, like, so little of this, like, this could be anything. This could be submarines trying to hit a target, and you could use all the same plugged in numbers and stats, but just change the names of the resources. Instead of horror and madness and death, or whatever they are, chaos, or chaos, destruction, and madness, instead of using those resources that you use to power these monsters, you could change it to, petrol, torpedoes, and sonar, and that would be the way that you could navigate it. So it's such a weird thing when you're trying to define the intangible in any kind of tangible game form. It's weird, and yeah, social and resource stuff is really difficult. Like for this game, weapons are basically just a bonus to your attack power. They don't have a whole set of stats unto themselves. I mean, they have the basics. Like a bow can shoot this far, right? But there isn't this heavy, like, war game level breakdown of what weaponry is and what it does, and it's meant like, okay, your character has a two-handed axe. All right, well, they get this much more power, but they need maybe a certain strength to wield it in the first place, or whatever. Or it takes away from your action points, which is how you determine how many things you can do around. And I really left items in this game as kind of this add-on to the character that don't. I mean, there are artifacts and things that have an effect in the game, but for the most part, I left it very like loose, very narrative, that aspect of the game. And I did that intentionally just so that it didn't become a game about collecting weapons. You can collect weapons. You can say your character has a collection of 30 swords from exotic makers, right? But do I need to put individual stats in for all those swords? So there's an example of even a tangible resource that I've reduced to a very basic concept. And the abstract I haven't tested, so I was saying to Tom earlier, I haven't even tested the social system yet. So I don't even know if it's going to work in my game. It's fairly straightforward. It probably will work. I don't know how effective it will be, or how much it will even come into play. Well, I think I'm going to be tuning out for today. I need to unfortunately attend to one or two other things throughout the course of the day. Thanks for joining me. To Bobicus and Blake and Curzon, Tom, who all made appearances today. Yeah, have a good one. I know there are a couple of people who popped on and off and were lurking, and that's great. Glad to have you. Thanks very much. As always, I'll cut to my end of stream pitch scene. So here we are, from the tomes, along with Fox and Boar Games. Stop on over to YouTube if you haven't. Subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, come on over to Twitch, and I really appreciate it if you subscribe to the Twitch channel if you are not a subscriber, and stop in for these work chats that I'm doing during the day as I progress through this RPG development. And also Wednesday night, of course, we have our once a week chat where we have sometimes lively discussions on some topic of gaming, particularly tabletop RPGs. We occasionally stray into the territory of movies and heavy metal music and anything else people decide they want to bring up and chat about, but we try to always circle it back to gaming. This week's topic, tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, will be cultures in RPGs, which is relevant to what I've been working on these past couple weeks. How to make culture seem unique, not just character, race, or class, but actually what drives that. What created those races, classes, or how are they different from one another? We'll throw it out there. We'll see what how the invites shape up to that. So stop by Fox and Board Games for all the updates on my game and some other games that I'm going to be releasing, hopefully, along with mine. Twitter, Facebook, you can find me there. And as always, thanks for the support. I very much appreciate it. I couldn't be doing this without everybody who has been following along and has been watching and giving me feedback and participating in the chats. So I hope to see you throughout the week. Thanks.